With all due respect and obviously with a lot of empathy to what Ukrainians have been going through, particularly in those towns on the outskirts of Kyiv, I think the most important word in your sentence, David, is apparent. These things need to be investigated. A lot of Ukrainian civilians were mobilized to be guerrilla fighters in this war, as they had every right to do, and by all accounts, they fought courageously. But before we jump to conclusions about whether civilians were targeted or executed, it needs to be investigated. Maybe these people were fighting, and they were killed by Russian troops as part of the act of fighting. We just don't know. There has to be an investigation done. I certainly think, to say the least, that all of the depictions, both from independent journalists and from the Ukrainians themselves, of what happened in these communities are well above the threshold of what would trigger an investigation. But these have to be investigated. We don't have a full sense of what all the facts are. And unlike, for example, the situation in Mariupol, where there were attacks from the air on targets that I think, on the face of it, seem clearly to be civilian targets, especially given the scope of what happened in Mariupol. Here, when you're talking about the potential of street-to-street fighting between one army and one set of civilians who are taking part in the hostilities, potentially, I think there has to be an investigation done. I think none of us should rush to judgment about exactly what happened there, but I think we should all absolutely demand an investigation so that we get those facts and have a sense of what happened.
I mean, certainly international bodies getting involved in that, some from the UK, that investigations seemingly will commence.
That's what's important, by the way, and again, I think that's where the focus has to be, on investigating, on learning what the facts are, rather than jumping to conclusions about what happened. Obviously, there's a lot of emotion here, and one can understand it. But again, there has to be a fair investigation with all of the full scope of facts of what happened. And just because there are evident war crimes in one part of the country, in Mariupol, doesn't mean that what happened in a very different set of circumstances, potentially, because again, we don't know, in these towns north of Kyiv, again, we're not talking about aerial bombardment, but we're talking about street fighting. I think we have to focus on the fact of this needing to be an investigation rather than saying more crimes are committed.
The wider picture, somewhat, we're seeing reactions from you now. Lithuania, now the first to formally cut the use of Russian gas, likely to be first of more to come. Does this seem to be the direction Europe is going?
Yeah, but over the longer term, obviously Lithuania is different from other European countries, David, because obviously they have more at stake. They consider themselves, and they are, a frontline state in terms of facing Russia. And it sounds fairly basic, but it's important here. It's a small country. So it's much easier for a country like Lithuania to replace its supplies of natural gas than it is for, say, a country like Germany of tens of millions of people. So again, it may be that Lithuania is a leading indicator, but a leading indicator at what pace do we then start to see the larger European countries able to get themselves off Russian energy? They've said that they want to do it. Many would argue they've said they wanted to do it belatedly, but it's going to take time. But Lithuania, I do think that it's important from Lithuania's perspective and from the European perspective that those who can do this do it, right? And that Lithuania be at the forefront and show leadership on an issue like this, given its position, right? That it shows that it has skin in the game, that it has stakes, that it's taking a leadership role rather than leading from behind.